Brother-in-law claimed I was dangerous to get me disinherited. Said, it's for the family's good. I proved his lies with secret recordings, got him arrested for manipulation, and he lost his job and family. Let me introduce myself. My name's Harland, but everyone calls me Harry. I grew up in a small town in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had history. 5 generations had lived on our family estate. It wasn't huge or fancy, just a big old farmhouse on a few acres of land, but to us, it was home. My mom, Claudine, is one of those tough-as-nails women who built everything she had from the ground up. My dad passed away when I was in high school, so it was just me, Mom, and my older sister, Sylvia, for years. Sylvia and I were close growing up. She was the golden child, straight A's, well-behaved, everything my parents could have asked for. I wasn't a bad kid, but I was always a little rougher around the edges. I barely scraped through school and ended up working construction, which I actually enjoy. But in our family, Sylvia was the one with all the promise. She went to college, got a business degree, and eventually married a guy named Gideon Vaughn. Gideon was a piece of work. He came from money, his family was old-school rich, the kind that looks down on people like me. He was polished, smooth-talking, and had this way of making you feel small without ever raising his voice. At first, I tried to get along with him for Sylvia's sake, but Gideon made it clear early on that he didn't respect me. He thought I was a loser because I worked with my hands instead of sitting behind a desk like him. I brushed it off because I didn't want to cause problems. But Gideon wasn't just a snob. He was manipulative in ways I didn't even realize at first. He had this way of getting people to trust him, to believe that he knew what was best. And he used that charm to work his way into my mom's good graces. Over the years, he became almost like a second son to her. At first, I was glad. Mom deserved to have someone like him around since Sylvia and I didn't always see eye to eye. But as time went on, things started to feel off. It all came to a head when Mom started talking about her will. Now, to understand why this was such a big deal, you need to know about the family estate. It wasn't worth millions or anything, but it was valuable. Between the land and the house, it was worth enough that selling it could have set someone up for life. But to my mom, it wasn't about money. The estate was her legacy, and she wanted to make sure it stayed in the family. For years, she'd said she planned to split everything equally between me and Sylvia. It made sense, there were 2 of us, and we'd always been treated equally growing up. But a few months ago, she started hinting that things might change. She'd say stuff like, I just want to make sure everything goes to someone who can take care of it, or, it's important to leave things in the right hands. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then Gideon started getting more involved in those conversations. He'd say things like, you know, Claudine, Harry's not exactly the most responsible person. Or, it's a big responsibility, maintaining a property like this. You need someone who's capable. I didn't hear him say these things directly, but Sylvia would mention them, almost like she was testing the waters to see how I'd react. I'd laugh it off because I thought, there's no way Mom would ever take him seriously. But I was wrong. One day, Mom sat me down and told me she was thinking about changing the will. She said she wasn't sure I could handle the estate and that she might leave it all to Sylvia instead. I was stunned. I asked her where this was coming from, and she just shrugged and said she had to do what was best for the family. That's when it hit me, Gideon was behind this. He'd been planting seeds in her mind, convincing her that I was a screw-up who couldn't be trusted. And it was working. I tried to talk to Sylvia about it, but she was defensive. She said Gideon was just looking out for Mom's best interests and that maybe he had a point. It's not personal, Harry, she said. You've always been a little unpredictable. Unpredictable. That word stuck with me. It was the same thing Gideon had been saying about me for years, and now Sylvia was parroting it back to me. I wasn't going to let this happen. The estate was my home, my heritage, and I wasn't about to let some outsider take it away from me. But I knew I couldn't just accuse Gideon without proof. He was too slick, too good at covering his tracks. So I decided to do something I'd never done before. I started recording our conversations. It wasn't hard to set up. I bought a small voice recorder online and kept it in my pocket whenever I was around Gideon. At first, I didn't catch much, just the usual passive-aggressive comments and veiled insults. But after a few weeks, I struck gold. Gideon didn't realize I was recording when he started talking to Sylvia about the plan. I caught him saying things like, once your mom changes the will, we'll be set. Harry's too stupid to fight it. And, it's not like he can afford a lawyer anyway. I was furious. But I knew I had to play it smart. If I confronted him too soon, he'd just deny everything and twist it around to make me look crazy. So I kept recording. Over the next few weeks, I gathered hours of audio of Gideon badmouthing me to my mom, bragging to Sylvia about how easy it was to manipulate her, and even laughing about how he'd convinced her I was a danger to the family. The final straw came when he called the cops on me. Yes, you read that right. One night, I came home from work to find 2 police officers waiting for me. They said someone had reported me for threatening behavior. I was shocked, I hadn't done anything. But then I saw Gideon standing on the porch, arms crossed, smirking. He told the cops I'd been unstable lately and that he was worried for Mom's safety. It was a complete lie, but I could tell they were taking him seriously. Luckily, I kept my cool. I explained the situation and even showed them the recordings I'd been collecting. The cops listened, and their attitudes changed immediately. They told Gideon he had no grounds for the accusation and warned him not to waste their time again. He looked furious, but he couldn't do anything about it. That was the moment I knew I had him. But I wasn't done yet. I took the recordings to my mom and played them for her. She was horrified. She couldn't believe Gideon had been lying to her for so long, manipulating her into turning against me. She apologized over and over, saying she'd never meant to doubt me. But I wasn't ready to forgive her just yet. The damage had been done, and I needed to make sure Gideon paid for what he'd done. After I played the recordings for Mom, Gideon's whole facade started to crumble. She was angry and embarrassed, angry that he'd manipulated her and embarrassed that she'd fallen for it. For a woman as proud as my mom, that was the ultimate betrayal. I could see the hurt in her eyes as she sat there, listening to Gideon's smug voice calling me too stupid to fight back and laughing about how he had her wrapped around his finger. She didn't say much at first, but when the last recording ended, she stood up, looked me in the eye, and said, "I'll make this right." But for me, it wasn't just about Mom realizing the truth. Gideon had gone too far, calling the cops on me, trying to steal my inheritance, poisoning my family against me. I wasn't going to let him walk away without consequences. The next day, Mom confronted Sylvia. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. Mom told her everything, about the recordings, about Gideon's lies, about how he tried to get me disinherited. Sylvia was defensive at first, saying Gideon was just trying to protect the family, but Mom didn't let her off the hook. She told Sylvia that if she stayed with Gideon, she'd be cut out of the will too. Sylvia broke down crying. I don't know if it was because she realized how badly she'd messed up or because she was scared of losing her share of the estate, but either way, she told Mom she needed time to think. Meanwhile, I had a bigger plan for Gideon. You see, Gideon wasn't just some guy who married into the family. He was a financial analyst for a big investment firm, and his entire career was built on his reputation. I knew that if I could expose him for the liar and manipulator he was, it would destroy him. So I took my recordings and started digging into his life. It didn't take long to find out that he'd done this kind of thing before. A few years back, Gideon had worked for another investment firm in New York. He left under mysterious circumstances, which turned out to be him manipulating a coworker into resigning so he could take their position. It wasn't illegal, but it was shady, and I figured it wouldn't look good to his current employer if they found out. I compiled everything I could, my recordings, old articles about his time in New York, even a few testimonials from people who'd worked with him and didn't have nice things to say. Then I sent it all to his boss. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. About a week after I sent the package, I got a call from Sylvia. She was hysterical. Apparently, Gideon's boss had called him into a meeting and confronted him with everything I'd sent. He tried to deny it, but the recordings were too damning. The firm fired him on the spot and reported him to the state financial board for unethical behavior. Losing his job was bad enough, but the investigation meant he'd likely never work in finance again. Sylvia begged me to back off, saying I'd ruined their lives. I told her it wasn't me, it was Gideon's lies that ruined everything. But I wasn't done yet. Gideon had made a mistake when he called the cops on me. Filing a false police report is a crime, and I wasn't going to let that slide. I took the recordings to the local district attorney and explained what had happened. They listened to the evidence and agreed to press charges. Within a month, Gideon was arrested for filing a false report and obstruction of justice. He ended up pleading guilty to avoid jail time, but the conviction was still on his record. His reputation was in shambles, his career was over, and now he had a criminal record to top it all off. Sylvia tried to stand by him at first, but it didn't last. After everything that happened, their marriage fell apart. She moved back in with Mom for a while, trying to mend fences. I wasn't ready to forgive her just yet, but I could see she was genuinely remorseful. She divorced Gideon a few months later and even wrote me a letter apologizing for not standing up for me sooner. I'm not sure if we'll ever be as close as we used to be, but at least she's trying. As for Mom, she made good on her promise to make things right. She rewrote her will, splitting the estate equally between me and Sylvia like she'd always planned. She also gave me something even more important, her trust. After everything we went through, she realized she'd been wrong to doubt me, and she told me she was proud of the way I handled myself. And Gideon? Well, the last I heard, he was living in a tiny apartment in a different state, working some dead-end job to make ends meet. He tried reaching out to Sylvia a few times, but she blocked him. He lost his job, his family, his reputation, everything he'd worked so hard to manipulate his way into. And you know what? I don't feel bad for him. He tried to destroy my life, and instead, he destroyed his own. In the end, I got my home, my family, and my dignity back. Gideon got exactly what he deserved. And for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe again.